from Beyond the Grave and the Comic Watchers Show. This is your host, Matt. Welcome to episode number 70. This is a very special episode for us because we have, as our very special guest, David Dastmalchian joining us. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you for having me.
That's right. With me, as ever, are fellow watchers Nick and Mike, and joining us for the occasion is former watcher Cody White, coming all the way from Hawaii. Welcome back, sir. So, man, we're going to talk a little bit of Count Crowley from Dark Horse this episode. That's why David's here. That's why it's one of many reasons why we love him so much. But David, you know, I'm sitting here and I'm going through your IMDb, and it kind of reads like a nerd fever dream. We got Ant-Man, Bird Box, Abracadabra on The Flash, of course, your first role in The Dark Knight, and now you're writing comics. And yeah, Count Crowley was awesome. We've given it a lot of love on the show. And, man, we got some questions. I'm going to let Mike kick this thing off, though, because he's possibly the biggest Count Crowley supporter of them all.
And I'll do thanks to Cody, because when he was asking about for reviewers, and I was kind of softly tracking this book and coming out, and I was just like, you know, it's something that I'm a huge horror fan, and it was definitely something that intrigued me as far as, you know, just on, you know, knowing your acting and your roles and stuff like that. So I was really intrigued that you were, you know, doing comics and your background and everything. So it was really rad. But the first question is, can you walk us through the origins of Count Crowley and how everything got started with Dark Horse?
Sure. And by the way, thanks again, guys, for having me on. It's really a horrific honor. I'm very excited. I grew up in Kansas City watching my local creature feature host, the incredible Cremation Mortem, who was our local Friday night. She had a Scream Theater, and she introduced me to all my early favorite Universal monsters as well as the Hammer stuff. She was really big on, obviously, B and Z and stuff that they were getting for cheap. And I became just so enamored with that world, but also with the world that she was creating. And I would, you know, enter all of her short story contests, and I would always try and win, like, get to go with Cremation to the Edge of Hell Haunted House in a hearse contest. And I never won them, but devoted fan for years. Then, you know, my comic book collecting kind of fascination really took off. I don't know how much you can see. So my stacks of long boxes are being organized right now as we speak, but that's just a small percentage of my collection. But I always dreamed of being a part of helping create a comic book, but honestly, you guys, it never seemed like something that, like, it was like, I've used this metaphor before, but I always loved eating the donuts, and I never really learned how they make the donuts. I just was, as an actor, obsessed with how films are made and how plays are put on, so I did study all the machinations of how that's achieved. But other than being fans of, you know, certain artists or writers or series or publishers, I just love being a collector and reader of the art of comics. And so the years went by. I've always had this idea since my early Cremation days that how cool would it have been if Cremation was actually secretly hunting monsters, or how cool would it be if Svengoolie was hunting monsters? What if Vampira back in the day had known more about monsters than we knew? And then that idea in itself was fun, and it had a lot of, you know, exciting potential, but it didn't have like the meat and I think the balls, if you will, that I would have needed to really dive in to make the story I would want to tell. And then as I grew up and battled addiction and my own struggles with depression and just the frustration of being somebody who's been an untrustworthy addict, in my case, I thought, wow, that's a fantastic story for somebody who actually is seeing true monsters, and no one will believe them because they've burned every bridge. So I came up with this idea. I wanted to try and tell the story as either a series of films or a short films or a TV series. And then when I was talking to Peter Lakoff, who's a great television creator, about the idea, he said, you know, I think you need to meet Mike Richardson. And I was like Dark Horse Mike Richardson? And he was like, yeah. He's like, I feel like this is an idea that Mike would get behind and let you really explore. so I got to sit down and meet with Dark Horse and the guys from Peter's company, and they basically said, like, this idea sounds like so cool, but it could also be like, we don't know exactly where you're going with this. And even though I'd written for decades now all these different like monster plots and ideas, it was hard to like lay it all out for them. So I pitched them and told them the ideas and explained Jerry and why I thought Jerry needed to be who she was. And they got excited and they gave me a shot. They said, let's do a limited series. Let's see, how it turns out. And then make the most of it. And so I dove in with just the most incredible team, my editor, my artist, my colorist, and my letterer. And the last year, you guys, as you can imagine, it's just been one of the most rewarding, exciting, incredible experiences I've ever had as a storyteller. And it's done really well. And thankfully to supporters like you, like obviously waiting to find out where Dark Horse lands on all of this. But I feel like we've just scratched the surface of the coffin, if you will, like just barely like dug a little dirt in the graveyard.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fourth issue ends on such a cliffhanger that, which killed Mike. Like, Mike was distraught for quite a while over that.
I don't want to talk about it right now.
It ends in such a way that we've had this certain amount of world building go on so far, and we have a good idea of what's up. And then you get to the end of issue 4, and it's like, oh wow, this thing is just primed to explode with a whole well-defined world unto itself. So me just as a reader, I'm immediately wanting more. If this thing had been an ongoing, it was like, oh wow, I'm going to run to my LCS like immediately and add this to my sub list. So obviously there's a lot more in store for Count Crowley and company. Do you have any inkling yet as to when we might see some more Count Crowley?
Like I said, we're in the middle of that right now. I'm like always checking my email too to be like, what is where are we gonna, how are we ever gonna, what are we gonna hear? When are we gonna hear the word? So it's really it's in the hands of powers beyond my own, but I know that I've done. I'm continuing to do my part in like sharing, talking about, and I've been writing, you guys, like if right now Dark Horse is like, this is a monthly series that's going to go until it just doesn't sell anymore, I could, and I'm not over exaggerating, like right now I have 3 years of like script that we could go to production on, because one of the interesting things about having so much time for this idea to marinate in my imagination is that I got to start with the small scale and be like, oh, a town kind of like where I grew up, and a TV show and a horror host kind of like the one I was watching. But I also was able to think much bigger over the years and think about, well, then where does this all come from? And who are these? What is there? Is there an agenda? And is there any overlying force? Is there a greater force behind the monsters that Jerry will face? And so I know the universe backwards and forwards. So I really hope I get to flesh it out, if you will,
Awesome. Yeah. We're ready. Mike?
In issue 4, we see the event that traumatized Jerry, and kind of had possibly a lead to her downfall, the alcoholism. And with regards to the Me Too movement, did that movement drive this event at all in the book, or did this event grow with Jerry's character and taking control back of her life?
We are in the middle of a rainstorm. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So there's a crazy, spooky rainstorm, which is very rare for Los Angeles right now, but like it's totally setting a great mood. I I will say the Me Too movement had an impact on that for certain. But so aside from just the Me Too movement in general, I had this weird, not weird, but sad, eye-opening series of conversations a couple of years ago. They all kind of happened around the same time, where I would talk to a different woman who was a friend of mine and get, hold on one second, and I would get basically a place from a place in time from these different women who are close friends to me, or even my own family, and they would recount these stories about like these experiences that they had had where somebody in a place of power had done something to them and had just basically gotten away with it because nobody believed them, and it was just weird. It was just like I heard one story, and then like a week later I heard a very similar story. And these are like some of the closest people to me, you know what I mean? And they're also people who I really look up to and I think are super badass, tough women. At that time, they, in my mind, Jerry was Jerry. So I thought he was a guy. For years, I thought actually Jerry was going to be a guy and that like I would play him in the like TV or film version of this someday, or I would hopefully get to be like the inspiration for the comic artist. After these stories and me continuing to look for what this was about on a deeper level, I started thinking about like what I was telling you guys earlier, like the frustration of when you're in recovery, especially like when I first started to get clean and sober, like being able to talk to people who I had burned bridges with, like my own family, my friends, and trying to tell them something that was really happening. But because I had been such a screw up, or because my addiction and my behavior had been so untrustworthy in the past, people really didn't believe me. And I needed to set this in the 1980s because there's a whole plot tie-in that has to deal with cable television and the birth of cable television. So that's why I wanted to set it in 1983. The story starts if you go to issue 1 in September of 1983. And so I thought again, like, oh my gosh, how, as empowered as women have been able to become with their voices during the Me Too movement, it's still, we're way behind where we need to be. But in 1983, it was really effed. I mean, like, it was those were the, you know, that's, I watched Bombshell not long ago, and like thinking about like the power structure for so many decades that just crazy.
Awesome. Nick?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's obvious you're comfortable in the horror genre and you're well learned in the horror genre. Just looking at your collection, as a fan, I'm so enthralled with your perspective and what you bring to the genre. And it's a lot of times been described that we're in a golden age or a resurgence of horror across a lot of different mediums. How do you feel about having a series that really fits into that mold really well and shines as a great example of horror in comics?
Well, that's very nice. Thank you, young man. That is a very nice thing to say. I like to think that Crowley can fit into this world, this movement, but that's, it's very nice of you to say. I'm so over the moon that we are living in the era that we are in regards to horror cinema. I think that there is something so spectacular about the fact that, horror movies can be made, and we've always known this. Like, by the way, I am never gonna speak negatively of like a good old fashioned like A to Z splatter flick that doesn't necessarily need to wrestle with important questions or ideas. I think that there is absolutely a place for that. I think that we need amusement park rides in our lives. I think some of us need to just escape. Sometimes confronting our fear of death can be done in a really cathartic way with just a dude with an axe who's just, for no apparent reason, unloading on people. Though the times we're living in right now, to me, feel like we are kind of hungry for maybe wrestling with some ideas or thoughts or questions about stuff. And so smart horror, elevated horror, dramatic horror, whatever you want to call it, has always landed the strongest with me, especially once I discovered it. And so I feel like we're so fortunate as horror hounds that we're living in a moment when, there's such a swath from, the Peels to the Eggers to you name it. And there's so many strong voices right now telling horrific stories and telling them in a way that's still entertaining. It's great. And I want Crowley to be that. I do want Crowley to wrestle with the hard subjects and ideas, because that's the only thing that gets me writing anything I think worthwhile. But at the end of the day, I still want it to look, move, and feel like a really, really fun classic piece of horror, and that's why I talking to Lucas wanted the monsters designed to feel very in honor of the tradition of classic monsters. Now, as we will come to find out, as Jerry has learned in these first 4 issues, and you're about hopefully to get to learn a lot more if I get to keep this story going, is that it's all bullshit. The whole mythology has totally been a lie that we've been fed. So even though they may look, move, and kill the way we think of our classic monsters, looking and moving and killing, you definitely can't stop a werewolf with a silver bullet. You're not going to be able to, stake a vampire in the heart with a wooden stake. Garlic doesn't do shit to a vampire. Zombies, you have to do much more than just a headshot. Like, as you see, a zombie needs to be quartered. Like, you know how hard that is? There's no way you're walking into a street filled with hundreds of The Walking Dead and you're going to be able to pull them, out with just crossbows and shotguns. Like, I wanted to make it really hard to stop the monsters in this world, because otherwise what's the fun anymore, Yeah.
Right. No doubt. Why make it easy on anybody? Cody.
Hey, yeah. First off, I want to say Ant-Man is my favorite of the Marvel films. I watch it probably more than any other human being in the face of the planet. So, hey, Kurt. Nice to see you.
Awesome. That's awesome. Hello. Bobby.
Yes. So I'm kind of the comic industry nerd of the group. Pay a lot of attention to how the industry functions, things like that. Obviously, your day job is going to be better paying than comics. But now that you've got a taste of comics storytelling, like if Count Crowley doesn't come to bear, I mean, I guess because of the way Dark Horse works, you could take it somewhere else, theoretically.
It's there's that. There is I can't let go of Count Crowley. Trust me, and I really do. I just have to. We're living in a really crazy time, obviously, even as we record this, as to like the market and what's going on. But
right.
I don't want to partner with anybody other than Dark Horse on something like Count Crowley. But I now that like I've had this experience, I do have many more stories that I feel like would lend themselves to the form of comic book storytelling, because as you guys know, it's in and of itself, it's such a specific format to tell stories. That doesn't mean that they all have to be classic superhero tales. As we all know, you can get anything from hardcore indie dramas done well in comics to horror to superheroes. But I think with the fantastical stuff the stories that I would like to tell, I have a couple of really big ideas that I'm putting together and figuring out how to present and try and get those going.
Very cool. If, let's say Jim Lee showed up tomorrow and said, hey, do you want to write Swamp Thing? Can we get you on Swamp Thing?
I'd knock somebody out of the way, man. Like, I grab my laptop and I'd be like, we've got this crazy virus happening right now, and I want to tie that into a story that's happening right now. We're trying to find this possible way of cracking this virus cure that, I feel like there's, Swamp Thing. I would love to get my hands on, a reimagining of how a Werewolf by Night could have an interaction with Peter Parker, especially as we're going into Spider-Verse and thinking about younger or different versions of Parker in the way that he could interact, especially when maybe he's starting in his job in journalism and his boss has this weird connection to this thing that's killing people out, around the city. I also would love to see Marvel, be tempted enough or find the purpose enough to bring something like Tomb of Dracula back. I would love to. I love serialized storytelling. I love the creep show world, so it would be neat to have a strong enough pitch to convince somebody to reboot a kind of eerie or creepy monthly serial. Obviously, I think there's some really cool stuff going with like anthology comics, especially in the horror realm, like Ice Cream Man, stuff like that. There's some really neat things that have been going on. So I would love. I'd love. I want to write, and I want to write. There's superhero stories that I really want to tell. I think that there are lesser known superheroes who I've always been a fan of, but even the big ones. I mean, I'm a huge Moon Knight fan. I'm a huge fan of maybe some weirder. I'd love to do something with Tigra. I know she just was in this recent reboot of the West Coast that they did, but like maybe a darker, more serious take on something like that. And I don't know.
All right, so Marvel and DC, you have been told. Let's get this. Let's go. Get cracking.
Yeah.
Mike.
Dude, there's so great studios, you guys. Boom and Image. And, oh my God! Like
yes.
There's so much good stuff out there, which always scared me with Crowley. Like, how is anyone going to find Crowley on the shelf? And luckily, as you just pointed out, Cody, I do work in my day job, if you will, is in a sphere where luckily I get a little more awareness about projects because I get to do things like go to the red carpet of Mulan the other night, in which then I can talk to press about, and they say, "What are you working on?" And I can say, Crowley, and I have my Crowley pins, or whatever. Like that.
Dude, that's so awesome. That's great, Mike. Bring the thunder, man.
Going back, Dave. Going back to our interview that you did for the website, you said growing up that you would always have crossover battles between DC and Marvel characters. So this is kind of going to be like a two-parter. One, who would you see Count Crowley battle? And do you see her being a member of the Justice League or the Avengers?
I definitely would see. I mean, I see her more as a defender. But if I was going to throw her in the Marvel world, I guess she would be a. I mean, between the two, that's interesting. That's an interesting question because I feel like she'd more of like pop up in like Ghost Castle or something on the DC side, and then if she was on the Marvel. But then again, what if like she wouldn't be like she'd be like an honorary member of the Justice League where like they go and they find her when like let's say Solomon Grundy raises some like spectacular army, of the undead, and like they need like her resources or her help. That would be really cool. And then on the Marvel side, yeah, like totally, she could be like an honorary Avenger. And again, like let's see, what would be really cool would be like an initial battle, and then ultimately like a team up between Crowley and like Morbius. It would be really cool. It just so you guys know, and this hasn't been explained in the comics that you've been able to read so far, but I want this information to make its way in the world of Count Crowley. Like baking a vampire isn't going to do the trick. And as vampire, even though they're averse to the sun and they're light sensitive, they can exist in the sun without dying. And so, to kill a vampire in the world of Count Crowley, you actually have to remove the heart. The heart of a vampire never dies in the world of Count Crowley. The heart is immortal. And so you have to remove the heart of a vampire that's had the curse of vampirism put upon them, and then keep the heart safely separate from the corpse of the vampire, bury that corpse, and then just hope that those two are never reunited. Because there's truly, when something is sold its soul and it's become immortal, I want that to be true. And so I wanted the idea that like, you actually can't kill a vampire. You can only immobilize a vampire. So it'd be cool to see like Jerry like trying to cut out Morbius's heart and then being like, "Dude, what are you doing? I'm trying to help cure the coronavirus."
Awesome.
Listen, if Jerry crosses over with anyone, I've got my heart set on Buffy, but that's just me.
No.
Oh, that there's so much inspiration from Buffy. Like it was really crazy. I was writing a script for issue maybe it was issue 1, but I was just really wrestling with some of my werewolf mythology and figuring out how I wanted to portray werewolf, because werewolves are such important monsters and I love them so much because to me they're both good and bad monsters. They fulfill that, like, I feel like there's a lot that I have in common as somebody that is an addict and has struggled with mental disease when thinking about lycanthropy, and they're such sympathetic creatures. The first time I saw, Curse of the Werewolf was one of the first horror movies I ever saw, in Cremacious Friday Nightmare, and I remember watching Oliver Reed and feeling so sad for him and also terrified of him. So anyway, that was a weird tangent, and I don't forget where I was going. But I was thinking about the mythology of werewolves, and I happened to go to a friend's birthday party downtown in Los Angeles that night, and I went to this bar, and I wandered outside because I don't drink, so I just wandered out to the backyard of this bar, and there was a blood moon that night. And I was looking at the blood moon, and there was this dude sitting there taking a picture of the blood moon. It just happened to be a dude hanging out at the bar. I'm standing next to him, and I look over, and it's Joss Whedon.
Sweet.
And I was like, I couldn't even explain to him why my mind was blown in so many bits at that moment. But yeah, that was pretty cool. I took that as a sign.
That's pretty amazing. It's really awesome. Well, we're running a little short on time. Let's do this quick speed round. Nick, did you have anything quickly?
Really quickly, could you speak to some of the importance of women in horror? I'm such a fanatic of horror, and it's something that I felt that the genre does so well, and I think that you captured that really well with Jerry in Count Crowley, and I think that your approach in horror really helped with that. So can you speak towards that a little?
Thanks, man. Yeah, the tradition of the last girl, the tradition of the female fighter is so important in horror, but yet this is a totally different take, in my opinion. And one of the things that I have not yet seen in as far as a female protagonist in the battles of horror, and don't get me wrong, I'm a dude who loves Vampirella. I'm a guy who loves Buffy. I'm a guy who loves so many of the female iterations of the characters in horror, especially in comics, but they have always been fetishized in a way that I wanted to try something different with Jerry. I wanted to, and Lucas and I were on the same page from the beginning. I was like, I don't want the shirt that pops up. I don't want the mini skirt. I just want some badass boots and jeans, and when she's in her costume, I want it to look vampiric, but classic horror. So that was the take we had on it. The idea was just that she's just like any other human, totally fallible. She sleeps with people. She's not slut. She's sometimes she's got needs. She drinks. She's fucked. She screws shit up. She's just kind of a wrecking ball. But it's tough, but it was just a goal for me, and I felt like it brought something hopefully a little bit fresh to the conversation when it comes to people that are horror fans, and it seems like people have found that to be a little nice thing that's a little different about Crowley.
Yeah, awesome.
Well, we're just about to the end of our time. David, we always end our show with quick little questions for ourselves. What have you been reading, and what do you look forward to reading? And now I present it to you.
Well, I just am catching up on some things. I really love all the Black Hammer stuff. I think that it's so good. Skulldigger is really cool. I'm very into, I think that Joe Hill's contribution now to comics in the last couple of years has been really exciting. As far as my superhero fandom right now, I'm diehard into what's been happening with Immortal Hulk. I think it's just such a cool take on, and that's been a fun read. The new Doctor Doom revamp has been fun. And I'm really looking forward to, I guess I'm looking forward to seeing what Emil Ferris, I heard, is working on something right now. And if there's one thing that I'm kind of dying to get my hands on, it would be the next. I'm sure it'll be a graphic novel, probably not a monthly series, but I think that Emil Ferris is probably the most profound voice to come out of comics and horror comics in the last couple of years. And so I really want to see like what the next thing is that Emil's going to do.
Awesome. Well, David, thank you so much for giving us a little bit of your time and stopping by the show.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, David Dastmalchian. The comic is Count Crowley, written by him, art by Lucas Kettner and Lauren Affey. Thank you so much for showing up. We will talk to you again
everybody.
some other time.
Bye-bye.